Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to continue a recent mini-series going through the evolution of the original Age of Kings civilizations. This is the third installment, and I haven't really been sure what to call it, but I'm kind of liking the title Through the Ages, so I'll use that for now. This time, we're going to summarize the more than 20 years of changes that have occurred for a couple of classic beginner favorites, Byzantines and Goths. Now, being popular with new players isn't a slight or to imply they're necessarily bad civs, but more that they both have some instant appeal and compelling unique units. These two civilizations in particular are also a nice contrast as well, as Byzantines were intended from the start to be unusually versatile with their unit choice and have a defensive focus, whereas Goths represent the other extreme and are entirely focused on one specific type of unit and all-out aggression. At the same time, while being polar opposites in some respects, the two shared some notable similarities, featuring large unit discounts, no early eco bonuses on release, and unique units that are specialized to counter what their unit type traditionally struggles the most against. Besides, how can you not make a video pairing the Eastern Roman Empire and Goths? It just wouldn't be right. So with that, we'll start off with the Byzantines. From the start, they've always had a remarkably open tech tree. In fact, they received the most techs of any civilization at release, missing only 9, compared to the Saracens' 12 and the Japanese 18, for example. Of course, 2 of the 9 techs that Byzantines are missing, they arguably get a better version of anyway through a civ bonus. Looking at their original bonuses at release in 1999, they should sound very familiar, with extra HP on buildings, camel skirmishers and pikes having a 25% discount, fire ships attacking faster, and the cost of Imperial Age reduced by a third. Notably though, their original team bonus for faster monk healing was at triple the usual rate instead of double as it is now. At the time, their team bonus meant monks healed at 450 HP per minute, which to put in perspective was almost exactly enough to offset a fully upgraded paladin attacking a unit with 0 base armor. Their cataphract, always a fan favorite, was at the time though quite a bit weaker without trample damage and importantly missing its hidden resistance to spears and camels. Despite that, legendary designer and developer for Age of Empires Sandy Peterson said at the time cataphracts were one of the most popular units in the game. Not to contradict him, but I found a forum discussion about Byzantines from before Age of Conquerors was released in 2000, and it seemed to be agreed upon, at least by players serious enough to visit the online forums, that cataphracts were very expensive and weren't very good, with one person noting they'll be a lot better once the upcoming expansion gives them trample damage. The theme that cataphracts are too expensive for high-level play is actually one that's carried over for quite a long time. Now, despite starting with a much weaker unique unit, Byzantines were if anything in a better position competitively in those early days, given the very different meta at the time. Recently, the common feudal openings typically involve men-at-arms, scouts, or archers, whereas in the earliest days, feudal wars between spearmen and skirmishers were much more popular. There were several reasons for that, but notable ones were that scouts didn't receive a free +2 attack in Feudal Age initially, walling typically happened later in the game, and it seems from posts I read players liked the idea of focusing on just wood and food. As it happened, Byzantines ended up being in a good position to execute that popular strategy with their unit discount. In this article from 2004, for example, the Feudal Age rush, or flesh, was identified as being around since the very early days, with Byzantines highlighted as a civilization set up to do it well, despite lacking a Dark Age bonus. The Age of Conquerors expansion in 2000, though, brought a number of notable changes. The first is Town Watch was given for free, adding some extra sight and warning in Feudal Age, fitting with their defensive theme. They also received their unique tech Logistica, giving cataphracts trample damage, which apparently had a way more powerful version during internal playtesting that we never got to see. I suspect instead of the +5 damage to surrounding units that they ended up getting, they did half of their attack, which is how trample damage worked for the War Elephant and would have been considerably stronger. Their monk's healing rate was also nerfed from 200% to only 50% faster. Byzantines also, of course, received the newly introduced Halberdier, while crucially missing out on the new tech Bloodlines. Considering their lack of the final attack upgrade, that made Byzantine paladins among the worst in the game. Cataphracts were also overhauled with a faster creation time, attack rate, and gaining resistance to anti-cavalry bonus damage from spears and camels. This was a somewhat revolutionary idea when you think about it, as cataphracts already had bonus damage against infantry, but this was really doubling down on the idea that this was a cavalry unit that you had to fight with either heavier cavalry or ranged units. This is the state where Byzantines remained for well over a decade. As the meta developed away from feudal trash units and the pace of play improved, partly thanks to new very aggressive civilizations like Huns, Aztecs, and Mayans, Byzantines fell out of discussions around the best Arabia civs. Typically, you'd only really see them brought up in discussions around the very late game as being notable, though even then there's almost always a mention of how expensive it is to get their upgrades, especially for the cataphract. Over a decade later, with the Forgotten expansion, maybe surprisingly then, the Byzantines remained remarkably unchanged. Their only direct buff was the new technology Greek Fire, adding +1 range on fire ships, on top of fire ships generally gaining 20 HP for all civs. Peterson envisioned fire ships representing not just Greek Fire, which this unique tech seemed to reinforce, and the new developers taking over the series seem very interested in making a rock, paper, scissors dynamic on water. Camels were also made a little stronger in the new expansions, with 1 more attack, which of course made them more viable for Byzantines among other civilizations. Shortly after, African kingdoms arrived with a reduced gold cost for the Byzantines' unique tech and a major overhaul on water, giving the fire galley as a feudal unit, which, considering Byzantine's faster fire rate and the fire galley's immediate popularity, was another significant indirect buff. Still, on land maps, the cataphract's reputation persisted as being too expensive, which was finally addressed in 2019's definitive edition. In that, the elite cataphract upgrade and the unique tech logisticas costs were reduced by a combined 600 food. Byzantines also underwent a cosmetic makeover, with their Middle Eastern architecture changed to Mediterranean and the cataphract looking, in my opinion, significantly more armored than they had before. Finally, in 2021's Dawn of the Dukes, they were given town patrol for free, and their monk healing rate increased from +50% to twice as fast as usual, both playing into their defensive identity. That's where they are today, and as for their ranked ladder stats, on open maps, 26 civilizations are better and 15 are worse, which about summarizes their results on closed maps as well. They're certainly not considered top tier on land maps, but searching for recent discussions online regarding Byzantines, they get a lot of credit for their flexibility and powerful unique unit, albeit the comments about being very expensive are still present. In retrospect, I'd say they're still quite honest to their original vision. They have a couple more free defensive techs added, some doubling down on the fire ship identity, and cataphracts have had some general tweaks to give them more of an anti-infantry role, and make them a little less expensive to tech into, though I'm sure some would argue that they haven't gone far enough. The second civilization we're going to look at is the Goths. Now, this has always been a controversial civilization. In a forum post from 2000, keep in mind this is just a few responses, but it's not terribly surprising to see Goths show up in a poll about everyone's favorite and least favorite civ being represented in both positions within the first few responses. Sandy Peterson even acknowledges they were intended to be a little controversial. Personally, I love civs with a really clear identity, and Goths certainly have that. If anything though, we'll see their concepts around spamming infantry that shreds through archers and buildings was not only present from the start, but has really been dialed up to 11 in the 2 decades since release. In case there's any doubt, Peterson directly said in an interview they were designed to be a horde civ who produces hundreds of cheap expendable warriors, though with an intentionally delayed startup, giving their opponents a fair chance. Another Age of Empires designer, Greg Street, pointed out there were a multitude of intended ways for Goths to be countered between their slow start and lack of defenses. Looking at the civilization on release, they had an increasing infantry discount, +1 attack for infantry against buildings, +5 attack for villagers against boar, +10 population limit in Imperial Age, and the team's barracks work 20% faster. The attack bonus against boar is an interesting relic of how the game was originally envisioned. Very early tutorials, for example, talked about hunting taking you far away from your town center, and that hunting boar in Dark Age may not even be viable for civilizations without this bonus. Of course, in the age of boar luring, the extra attack can actually be a handicap, leading to killing the boar too early, though obviously what they had in mind was villagers going out in groups to hunt, where it would have been an advantage. The +10 maximum pop cap was also a bit of a carryover from the early days, as the Age of Kings demo had a population limit of 75. Custom scenarios before the Age of Conquerors expansion also had a hard limit of 75 pop per player, which is reflected in the old campaigns. Presumably, when they came up with the bonus, they didn't imagine 200 population per player being the standard, and certainly not the 300 pop cap that's so common in the unranked lobby today. As for the Huscarl, like the Cataphract, it was quite a bit weaker on release. They trained at a very long 26 seconds each, had 4 Pierce Armor in Castle and 6 in Imperial, along with only +3 or +4 against archers. On top of all of that, they also moved significantly slower. From the start, Greg Street explicitly stated that champions were an intended default unit choice for Goths, being cheaper and more powerful. Huscarls were really meant to be an anti-archer and tower specialist, and remember in Age of Kings there were no unique techs, so Huscarls were actually a difficult unit to mass from castles alone. The Conquerors expansion though really doubled down on everything we've seen so far about the Goths and dialed it up to 9 or 10. Rather than staggering, their infantry became a flat 35% cheaper starting in Feudal Age, and the combination of Anarchy and Perfusion was introduced, allowing Huscarls to be produced at a barracks, and for the barracks themselves to work at twice the normal rate. The Huskarl itself also underwent some major changes to their training time, increased pierce armor, greater bonus against archers, and faster movement. It's fair to say that everything they were intended to do, they became much better at doing in the Conqueror's expansion. Like Byzantines though, the lack of an early eco bonus and a shifting meta toward archers and cavalry meant they generally fell out of favor competitively, though in the right situations their infantry spam was never dismissed entirely. Forums were likewise flooded with new players asking how to counter the Gothic unit spam, with predictably a lot of responses about how the secret is to not let Goths boom, which would probably be the same advice given today. Generally though, they weren't considered very strong, and for example, in Zero Empire's 5 worst AoE2 civs list from 2014, Goths landed as the 4th worst in the game. Unfortunately, this is before win rates were being tracked, so it's hard to say exactly how they were performing, but the perception at least was not very well. In the Forgotten expansion, like Byzantines, the developers didn't seem very motivated to make Goths more competitive. Treadmill Crane was removed, and other than that, the civ was unchanged. More indirectly, walls in general received a nerf, with longer construction time and less HP, which you could argue works out for Goths and suits their playstyle, though it also weakened their own early defenses. As I noted in the last episode, there was also a slow but consistent push for infantry over the years, and Goths have of course benefited from that incrementally. In African kingdoms, the tech arson was added, and while Goths are now the only civilization who don't have that tech, initially they got it, just like every other civ. They were also temporarily given arrow slits, but that was later removed and probably fits their identity better. The true Gothic Renaissance was just around the corner though, with Definitive Edition, where for a time changes were being pumped out faster than Huskarls from a barracks. To set the stage for why so many changes came so quickly, you have to think about the position of the Goths going in. Not only do their bonuses singularly focus on infantry, which is considered less competitive than archers and cavalry civs, but they also didn't have a Dark Age bonus, which is a major drag in competitive situations. As a consequence of their original design, they became almost the exact opposite of what you'd be looking for in a high-level 1v1 Arabia game. Keeping that in mind, shortly after the release of Definitive Edition in 2019, a patch gave the seemingly innocuous but in retrospect very broken bonus of applying the Goths' infantry discount to all ages, where previously Dark Age had been excluded. While obviously well-intentioned to give them an early game boost, this resulted in an incredibly oppressive militia rush, with meme videos appearing of all in Dark Ages overwhelming town centers with men-at-arms in mid-feudal. It only took a month before that was walked back to a staggered discount, though still including something for Dark Age, and arson was removed, along with a now staggered version of their anti-building bonus, meaning Dark Age militia no longer had that extra attack. Still unhappy with their Dark Age, another change came a month later that shot them to the top of the ladder. They were given Loom for free as a civ bonus, essentially putting them one villager up and giving them an extra 50 gold to spend on their discounted militia. Heading into Definitive Edition, Goths were a below-average civ, and at their strongest with the free Loom bonus, they floated between number 3 and number 1 overall, with consistently around a 54% win rate. After years of mediocrity, for about a 6-month period, Goths were indisputably one of the best civs on the ladder, winning a lot of quick games. What finally brought them back to earth was free Loom was replaced with instantly researched Loom, meaning they retained a villager advantage, but had to spend 50 gold on it like everyone else. The effect was immediate and brought their win rate from being at the top to down to about average. It was a lot of tinkering in a short time period over 2020, with seemingly every major patch bringing another change to Goths. At this point though, they're back to sitting between average and slightly below average, albeit with a more interesting early game than they had previously, now with 2 early game bonuses where for years they had none. Arguably, the handling of the Goths has been the first misstep by the developers we've seen this series, and arguably was the result of going against the civilization's original vision. Remember, Goths were originally envisioned to have a generic weak Dark Age, and when that formula was tinkered with, it was amazing how quickly they rocketed to the top. Still, I think what we have now is a reasonable compromise between their original concept and the reality of trying to be an infantry civ in a very cavalry and archer-dominated meta, and where early eco bonuses are critical to being competitive. Like I said off the top, I think Byzantines and Goths make for a great contrast. Both were originally known for their Imperial Age potential and unconventional unique units, which is still true today, while in most other ways the two civs are polar opposites. In case you're curious, as I certainly was, on open maps the civs have an almost exactly 50% win rate against each other, which sounds about right historically. The Goths brought down one of the Roman empires, but were outlasted by the other. Shout out to Jean-Paul, Connor, James, Kyle, Justin, Jockster, Brock, Seb, John, Woodruff, Samantha, Yang, and everyone else on Patreon for their awesome support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.